I'd like to introduce the next speaker, and it's going to be Oscar Nduri, and his presentation is on the topic, Africa's Care for the Environment, the Perspective of African Christian-Muslim Dialogue, anchored on Laudato Si. Oscar Nduri is a PhD student here at Marquette. Oscar, your time starts now.
Thank you. So may I have the microphone? The guiding thesis of this reflection is that Ubuntu, rooted in African communal consciousness, when placed in dialogue with Laudato Si and the ecological ethics of Christianity and Islam, offers a holistic theological vision for environmental conservation in Africa. I know somebody would ask, why talk of Africa's care? Africa is so big. But then I'm also justified. When you read Chinua Achebe's The Trouble with Nigeria, where he says that it is not with the environment, but leadership. That leadership, the way it is a challenge in Nigeria, so is it in Kenya. And then I read also Emmanuel Katongole's Who Are My People? When he talks of the environmental degradation in Uganda, that is what I see in Kenya. And then I've been to several places in Africa. So then my experience is grounded on the things I've read and so my experiences. And so I think I can speak categorically about Africa. And as I do that, I want us I'm going to use two case studies. One of the Niger Delta in Nigeria, and then the Mau Forest Complex in Kenya. And somebody would say, why pick on Nigeria? It is Nigeria, and again, the solution I'll be prescribing will also be based on a Nigerian experience, again, in the sense of Ubuntu, that humanity that binds us as Africans. So that is the basis of all that is taking place here. So here we have the case of Niger Delta in Nigeria. And the environmentalist Cyril Obi attributes the challenges in the Delta region to the British colonial system that pitted the major communities against the smaller ones. And then that is something that was not corrected over time. And then here you see then people going against the spirit of Ubuntu, that these resources are ours, but then the minority groups that were originally there also have a right, but then we have now a system that now tries to push them, edge them out, and then becomes a cause of conflict. So then we would refer to resource curse in Africa. In other parts of the world, areas endowed with resources profit, and it helps human flourishing, but then it becomes the reverse case in our context. And then when we move to this side, so this is the Niger Delta, part of the environmental degradation. And what perpetuates this is what is referred to here as neo-patrimonialism, a system whereby instrumentalization of disorder by African political elites to undermine the state and pursue their personal interests, resulting in conflict, state failure, and crises. This is important because then the social crisis, if you read Laudato Si, parallels ecological crisis. These things are intertwined. And if you talk of like the case of Nigeria, then there's people who exercise leadership who should then ensure that the resources serve the interests of the people and also guarantee sustainability in the use of the resources are self-serving. And then they would also exploit their ethnic networks in the name of we are in the power, but then it is only a clique. So whoever you see representing a number of African countries, be it in UN conferences, self-serving individuals in connections with the corporates. So that becomes a challenge, and politics then becomes something self-defeating, not only in Nigeria. You move to Kenya, where you will be told that those who count the votes determine who occupies leadership. So it means if somebody has been elected, they are only responsible to the persons the system that rigged them in. So then there is a leadership that is out of touch with the needs and the realities of the people. And that is why we have like the youth demonstrations in Kenya, in Uganda, in Nigeria. A leadership that is divorced from the realities of the people. But then it is so strong such that if the young people pour into the streets like in Kenya, they use power, military force against them and kill so many extrajudicial killings. So then you realize that people are raising other questions about the state of the political structure, the social structure of the system, which again impacts on the environment. But then it is so big, it is something that is a beast-like that is devouring the system. So neo-patrimonialism is a reflection of failure of political leadership in several African countries, and this now affects even the conservation efforts of the environment. This is the case of Niger Delta. Now, we have the Mau Forest Complex, which is a complex of 16 contiguous forests and 6 separated satellite forests. Together, they form a single ecosystem that make up the largest remaining indigenous forest in East Africa. Now, the political leadership have come up with deliberate plans to plunder. You can see these are political leaders that hive off, grab parts of the forest lands, then have lumbering companies that cut trees, then they do even commercial agriculture. But then the people who should be making laws to ensure everything works well are the people who are perpetrating this. Now the challenge comes, the Mau Forest Complex is the source of rivers that flow into Lake Victoria, then eventually find their way in Nile River, find their way in Lake Turkana, and Lake Turkana borders Ethiopia. Then Lake Natron also borders Kenya and Tanzania. So then this resource is not only a Kenyan issue, but something that when misused, then affects the whole region as a whole. So we see the spirit of Ubuntu has been turned upside down, and then the uniqueness, the sacredness of nature, when tampered, then divorces the patrimony that this is a heritage we receive from ancestors, and not only for a particular group of people, but has a benefit that spreads all over. Now, if that being the case, so what can we come up with technocratic solutions to these problems? No, because you realize that the people in leadership, I looked at the Pew Research Center report, 95% of Africans are aligned with Christianity and Islam. And most of these leaders, in one way or another, identify with Islam or Christianity. So then, to find a way of making sense of the sacredness of the environment, then it means theology has to enter into a dialogue because it can't be that technocratic solutions alone. So then that brings us to the biblical foundation. And I'm intrigued by what Pope Francis says with regard to Genesis chapter 2, verse 15, the difference between tilling and keeping in contradistinction with Genesis chapter 1, 28 about the domination. To till, to use, to keep, then to care. So there is that aspect of care that humans have a responsibility to carry out, which, when compromised, then causes environmental degradation, but again, results in anthropological challenges. And something again struck me when I read Jeremiah chapter 4, verse 23 to 26. 4 times he uses the word, I looked. So then, this is the reason why I'm making this presentation, despite the publication of Laudato Si in 2015, and so many have been written about the environment. But then we have to look and again and contemplate and say that the state of things is not right. This is not how things should be. So my looking is, that invitation that this should be a way of life that we reflect again and again, even on what has already been published, so that we make environmental conservation a critical component of our life, of who we are. And then there are also writings, contributions of patristics. And one thing I find interesting, the goodness of God. God created the world out of his goodness. So then if he doesn't stand to gain anything, and that is what we even gather from the fourth common Eucharistic prayer. Our prayers add nothing to your greatness, but the prayers even we make to God profit us for our own salvation. So what God has given us out of his goodness, then we have a duty to also take care of. And then Thomas Aquinas says that everything that exists, the mere fact of that existence is good in itself. So if there is that aspect of perfection, then there is need to go back again to this patristic and historical perspective of the care, what nature means. So this debate takes place within the confines of integrality of ecology. We cannot just rely on the mathematical, biological categories. We have to go back to the systems that formed people's thought patterns over the centuries. All these contribute to that integrality. And if that is the case, how then does Ubuntu come in? We know that Ubuntu, I am because you are, and since we are, therefore I am. And then, again, the connection between humans, plants, nature, everything participate in the well-being of the society. And then everything, be it a stone, has its own space, its right to exist. And as I mentioned, that the challenges of Kenya, challenges of Nigeria, are more or less intertwined. So there is a spirit, something that binds us Africans, that then, if it is led to initiate a dialogue between Christianity, Islam, should then find a motivation to engage the leadership and everyone else on the need to care for the environment. And then Islamic perspectives, I look at the oneness of God from whom everything flows, becomes something fundamental in this debate. Fitra, original plan, everything, more or less like what Thomas Aquinas says, that whatever exists is perfect according to its nature. So Fitra then becomes something that helps human beings to relate respectfully with nature. And mizan, moderation, balance. And then khilafa, stewardship. So if this is the case, we should not only lament about the environmental degradation. So reading the works of Emmanuel Katongole, he says that we should come up with stories, with images, with metaphors that help us to reimagine communities that are then beneficial to the human flourishing. So the story I'm building on is of Father Godfrey Nzamujo, a Dominican priest from Kano, Nigeria, who studied engineering, development economics, and was a professor at the University of California. But then when famine struck Ethiopia in 1983-85, he looked at the emaciated African children and he felt touched. He said, this is not right, this is not who we are. So he decided to resign from his prestigious teaching job. He had 2 doctorates. Then returned to Nigeria. He wanted to come up with an integrating farm, but the leadership was not interested. And then in the spirit of Ubuntu, why I'm using this, he moved to the neighboring country, Benin, where he came up now with an integrated farming center, Songhai Center. So, and when he appealed to the leadership, they gave him a polluted land. So he used his knowledge of biology to transform that land. And then in the land, there is crop production, there is that livestock keeping, and then there is the aquaculture, and then there is again aspect of, there is a park and an industrial center. So everything brought together. So it means waste from animals, used to nourish plants, human beings. So everything, there is a circularity in the production process. So it means an integral perspective of development. But then Father Nzamujo would have not gone this far if he was not nourished by the Dominican spirituality of contemplating the goodness of the Lord and then sharing. So he says that he contemplated nature based on his scientific training. And then out of the fruit of the contemplation then, he created that center which then trains young people and sends out to share the fruit of the contemplation on environmental conservation. And because of the success of the Songhai Center that he created, in 2008, it was honored by the United Nations Development Program as a center for excellence. And then his model has been replicated to 15 African countries, again in the spirit of Ubuntu, the interconnectedness. So it means then, when we gather here, when we speak, there should be the aspect of, again, praxis. What, again, do we intend to do? It shouldn't just be greater theological reflections that are devoid of the sufferings of the people. So it becomes a model, and then it becomes then a template to reimagine social imagination that, okay, our continent is in dire need of environmental conservation, political reform. But then, despite the bottlenecks, when we use our faith, because we are a believing continent, and then we play that leading role and journey with the people, some of the challenges we witness in the continent, we can tackle. And then I'm also impressed by the CINESA. It is Catholic Youth Network Environmental Sustainability Association. It was founded by somebody with whom we were Jesuit candidates. He studied environmental sciences at one of the universities in Nairobi. Then after finishing, he decided to rally Catholic youth to be actively involved in environmental conservation. And the good thing, he works even with other Muslims to care for the environment. So it means things are possible and we can do something if we commit to what we share. That marks the end of my presentation.
Thank you very much, Nduri. You have been keeping time for us, and you have kept it so perfectly now. Please, we would entertain some questions for Oscar. Are there any reactions?
Simon. I went out, so no question.
Okay. Yes.
No, Episcopal, go ahead.
Yeah, let's go from the Episcopus.
Thank you so much. It was very moving. It's interesting that you compared Ubuntu with a whole range of Islamic notions like Tawheed, Fitra, Mizan, Khilafa, but you didn't elaborate there. And these are very important notions for Islamic culture, all of them. Like, what are the main differences and commonalities between Ubuntu and, say, Fitra? Fitra means inner nature in all of human beings. Mizan means kind of ecology that is established by God himself. Khilafa is also, means vicegerentship, to be God's viceroy on earth, vicegerent, God's vicegerent on earth. So, for instance, I can relate between inner nature and ecology and Ubuntu, but what about being God's viceroy on earth and Ubuntu? Because I don't know Ubuntu really well, I just heard, but in my understanding, Ubuntu is like Tao, right? It's like a natural way of things that everything proceeds in. But you may correct me, yeah? So thanks.
Okay, so one way of approaching it from my presentation is in the traditional African worldview, things do not simply interact with each other, with other things. Rather, there is a universal field in which forces interact with one another. Stones, animals, plants, human beings constitute the universal field of interacting forces. It does not consider as mere matter physical elements interacting with one another. Such forces operate in people's emotions, ideas as well. Essentially, these forces encompass the physical and the spiritual domains and are at the core of life. So if we are so connected with even the natural elements, and humanity is endowed with rationality, so then as vice-regents, that is stewards, so it means then there is that aspect of stewardship, care for them because they have a right of their own to exist. As you might have heard in other presentations, there would be like sacred stones in which people believe gods exist. So you look at that stone, it is not just a mere stone, but it is also, it has a life of its own because it is inhabited by the spiritual forces. So it means if, let's say you are putting up a structure and you wanted some materials to, you just don't go picking other items. You have to do things prudently, recognizing that what you use sustains you, and then the things also have a right of their own to exist.
Okay. Yes, next, we have a reaction here.
Well, it's not really a reaction, it's to, where's the reaction? It's to thank you for the presentation. Since the beginning of the conference, Simon has been bashing Dominicans. And to hear you highlight the work of Father, Nzamujo, you know, I really applaud you for that. That's why, because Father Nzamujo, what he did was being decolonial even before the term became very common. And that's the point you highlighted. But let me just add is that sometimes from his own experience or from his own example, it also shows that to be decolonial, you have to be subversive sometimes. And I think that's the point you are making. When he left whatever he was doing and he came back to Nigeria and the leadership would not allow him to do what he wanted to do, he became subversive. But look at it became a success. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you very much. And we have another hand here.
Okay. Well, when I raised my hand, it was because no other person raised his hand. Having said that, so thank you so much for your presentation. I liked so much you emphasizing ecology and then being able to integrate that with Islam and then also politics in Africa. There is this view, especially once we are talking of ecology, environment in Africa. There is this view is that the West has developed. When they were developing, they were not talking of sustainability. Now they think they have reached the moon. They are no longer talking about. Now their main concern is to conquer the rest of the planets. Now they are preventing others, and now they are talking of sustainability. What do you think of that type of position, that this emphasis about ecology is a way of preventing the developing parts of the world from actually making use of the resources just as the developed made use of it without thinking of its exhaustibility or whether it is not sustainable?
I listened to a video clip by Father Godfrey, and after reading his work in Emmanuel Katongolde's book, I was intrigued. I said, what kind of man is this? So I went to watch. The way he's doing things, I think environmental conservation is a win-win situation. Nobody loses because, like in his farm, everything that is would be considered a waste becomes a product for the other form of life. So then it is a self-sustaining entity that also respectful of the human needs and the environment. So I think we lose nothing by going environmental. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And since you, hold on, sorry. Since you gave us plenty of time, you would answer many questions. I have one before you leave. So you're talking about an interreligious kind of attention to the environment. And specifically, you have cited Christianity and Islam. I am from a society where there are almost equal Christians and Muslims, so there are a lot of conflicts. My question would be, given the understanding of what you cited from Pope Francis, the whole idea of to have dominion and to think about it, about tilling and caring. In your own experience or your study on Islam, do you see a point of convergence, or do you see some kind of divergence in terms of the theology of how we use creation between Christianity and Islam?
I think there is convergence because when, like, for example, if you read Quran 112, verse 1 to 2, it talks of, say he is God, one God, everything, refuge. And then Quran also mentioned that God created everything, then he ordained it very exactly. So this one resonates with even the Christian notion. If we have to till, use the resources and take care of them, we take care of them because all that has been created, as the Genesis tells us, God saw that it was very good. And the same notion, I think, is also there in Islam. And then, like, Islam is also opposed to corruption because you realize Africans' environmental challenges is because of the inefficient political system. And Islam is very much against people using their political offices or leadership positions to oppress others. So then I think there is a commonality. And then when we talk of even Father Godfrey Nzamujo, when he was creating the Songhai Center, part of the 5 youths he used, one of them was a Muslim. And what is funny with that Muslim, he was somebody who had been in trouble, had trouble with the government and had been sent to a rehabilitation center by the Dominican sisters. So he was somebody who had some issues. But then this priest goes and includes him in the team, and he becomes a critical member of his team, an aspect of cooperation. Okay. Yeah.
Dominicans again, thank you very much. Okay, I think you can take one. Okay. Let's do this.
Thank you. I'll touch something as we come, but 2 observations that I would like you to mind. Number one, the interpretation of the Bible or the translation varies. In our culture, in Ge'ez, it says in versus over. So dominion over versus our is wista, which means in. So a person is inserted into God's creation to take care. Okay, that's the interpretation, the translation that we have to observe from another perspective. The second one is on Islam. A friend of mine many years ago, when we were talking about the environment, the Quran says that a place where you go, you have to live it better than you find it. So that's the Islam's teaching, that we have to take care of the environment, not only that to live it the way we found it, but improve it. So that's the convergence where Islam and Christianity is. So that's it's not a question, that's my observation and comment. Thank you.
Thank you for helping me lift the weight.
Yes, please, let us applaud Nduri for a great presentation.